Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the FPL Wire. Today, I have with me somebody who's just an encyclopedia of football knowledge. Every time I listen to him, I'm just amazed at the way he's able to talk football, the way he's able to articulate, what we see on the pitch in a podcast format, in a video format. How are you doing, James? Good to have you here.
I'm very well, Pranav. Thanks very much for having me on the show, mate.
Right, James. Just so that our listeners know, how many podcasts did you do last week?
Depends if you're including the Patreon ones or not. With the Patreon, 25, without 20.
25 podcasts in 1 week.
In 6 days, technically, yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. I don't know how you do it. You guys, in case you haven't already seen James's podcast, what they do is it's a big week. It's a correspondent week that they do just before the season begins, where they're talking in depth, covering every club with a fan from each club. I've made my way through about 6 or 7 of them, and my content is done after today. This is the last piece of content that we are putting out on our channel, James. So I know the next 2 days I'll be listening to your stuff.
Glad to hear it, mate. I think the correspondents will be honoured to hear you're going to be listening to him as well, mate.
Every year. It's not new. It's been a while since I've been listening to you. So yeah, it's nothing new.
I think if we didn't do it any year now, people would go mad if we didn't do it. So yeah. It's one focus podcast with each of our fan correspondents, which is primarily fan focused, but obviously we touch on the FPL aspects. Some things we go into more FPL detail, like with Tottenham, than we would do with, say, other clubs, like, say, Everton at the moment. There's only so many times I can repeat about Nathan Patterson, for example. So yeah, it's great. It's really enjoyable for us. And obviously, you've said you've listened to 7. I've got the advantage because I've got the opinion of all 20 of them, right? So yeah. It's a great learning experience for me and Suj as well.
Yeah, I think it's just a great way to dive into the season, where you're getting into the nuances of each club, getting to know in depth in terms of where each club is. Now, just out of curiosity, I was always curious and wanted to ask you, how did Planet FPL Pod come along? Like, how do you and Suj know each other? When did this whole thing begin?
So I went and worked for Suj's packaging company, and I won the mini league. Finished 21k that year, which I know that's a rubbish rank for you, mate, but it's a good one for me. And he said, "Do you want to do a podcast?" And I said, "Yeah, let's do a podcast." And then it became, "Do you want to do next week?" So yeah, okay. Then it was the week after, and then it became, "Do you want to do twice a week? You want to do 5 days a week? You want to do 2 pods on each of the 5 days a week?" And that's kind of where we are now.
Wow, that's incredible. No, in case you guys don't know, I'm a very happy paying Patreon for Planet FPL, and I highly, highly recommend it. Can't recommend it enough. If you guys, have a larger appetite for podcasts, these guys are the guys to listen to. The point of getting James on here is because I think Spurs are a very important topic of conversation just before we enter into game week 1, because I've been singing that song for a while, wherein the opportunity that Spurs assets Kane and Son present, the wingbacks present before game week 1, is a big talking point. So we're going to get right into that after the sponsor plugs.
DreamSetGo is India's first sports travel and experiences platform, offering a range of premium end-to-end authentic experiences across football, cricket, tennis, F1, rugby and golf, among others. From matchday hospitality to VIP stadium tours, from private meet and greets with athletes and legends to exclusive access to their training sessions, DreamSetGo curates the most fulfilling sports travel packages for fans like you. All data you see on the FPL Wire is taken from the Fantasy Football Scout members area. The new improved members area is now up and running, and the new comparison tool lets you compare key stats for up to 3 players. Player projections are also live, and as always, you can access the custom stats table we create or make one for yourself. Sign up for membership today using our affiliate link in the description below.
Right then. James, how do you feel about the season? How do you feel going into the season?
Yeah, I think we have every reason to be confident. 23 points, final 10 in the back end of last season. I think when Antonio took over, finishing top 4 was miles away. It was a case of just getting the team sorted into a structure, trying to enjoy the football again, because we hadn't for a few years under the previous last 2 managers. And now we go in with real hope. I think in normal seasons, you'd be hoping to say, could we push for the title? I don't think that's realistic because the top two are just so strong, and it's unthinkable to think that they could both fall away and drop off sort of 15 points each. You'd always got the chance that one will, but both, it seems unrealistic. So a little bit of consolidation. I think, unlike previous seasons, we now go into this season thinking it would be unacceptable to finish outside the top four. Obviously, the fan base are very demanding for a trophy because it's been 13 years now, but we have every reason to feel very confident going into this season.
Nice. I mean, I was talking to Baker, who does the above average FPL podcast, and he always tells me that, if James is positive on Spurs, then everybody should be positive on Spurs because he's generally treading
Negative.
a cautious line with his club, etc. as well. So, tell us, do you think Harry Kane and Heung-min Son, I'll talk straight about the elephant in the room, do you think they're viable FPL options?
Of course, absolutely viable. You can make a strong case. I think probably depends whether you're in Mo Salah camp or no Mo Salah camp. They're very viable captaincy options in game week 1, both of them. Never mind, are they viable options? I think it's nice to see that the ownership of the two players in the game at the moment is basically split. I think it tells a little bit of a story that actually, in the case of these two players, they've probably got the pricing just about right on Sonny and Kane. I think Sonny personally is worth the little bit extra because of the clean sheet potential and the extra point at the goal. But you can spin your narrative with either of them either way. You can say, oh, Harry's on pens, the shot volume. Sonny's such an exceptional finisher. He'll always outperform his XG. They're both outstanding players. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't sit here and say definitely pick one or the other. I know there's a few people out there looking to go with both, and I think you can.
Yeah, I think what really sort of enables it is that home fixture for City in game week 2 against Bournemouth, and should you want to make a switch for one of them, it sort of just enables a nice set of transition. You can take your time to judge whether you want to hold on to Kane or Son, and then decide whether you want to get somebody like a De Bruyne or an Erling Haaland. Now, let's talk about Harry Kane because it's been intriguing me, and I was looking at his data for the last 5 or 6 years. Last year was the only year he had a down year in terms of underperforming his XG. Has he all of a sudden become a bad finisher? What do you think has happened there?
No.
Yeah.
No, not at all. I think it's fair to say that he effectively took the first 4 months of last season off, didn't he? So I think that certainly played a part. It took him a long while to get up to fitness off of the back of the Euros. It was obviously a very engaging tournament for him as England captain, plus all the transfer stuff with Manchester City. He obviously did want to go. We all know that. And I think it took him to an understanding of what Antonio Conte was trying to bring to even get himself up to a level that he honestly wasn't performing to any form of Harry Kane level till we got into January. So without him for a long time. In terms of underperforming his XG, similar to Sonny, I'd look at it more as an anomaly because he is one of the best finishers in the business. Right foot or left foot, doesn't matter. I wouldn't be concerned about that in any way, to be honest, Prano.
Yeah, that's what I just wanted to. It's what seems like to me. It just seems like data that you probably want to ignore because it doesn't. I mean, we saw a fair amount of Spurs last year, especially under Conte, and it doesn't seem like he's lost his finishing or anything of that sort. If anything, in fact, in preseason, he looks leaner, he looks sharper, he looks absolutely on it. When he's putting them in the corner of the net from outside the D, you know that this guy's on it.
I think it's probably just a little bit of adjusting mindset where obviously we've been in a position from a fantasy perspective for Harry that he's been the man for 5-6 years. And now obviously in Sonny, he's got an equal, a player that's actually priced more than him. If I'd have said to you 3-4 years ago, Heung-min Son will be priced higher than Harry Kane, you wouldn't have believed me. But it's justified at the moment being ranked as obviously a midfielder within the game. If there was to be a negative about Harry, you could make the case that obviously he's becoming more of a creative player than what he was in the past. Therefore, at certain times when the team needs creativity, he will drop deeper and obviously people will run beyond him. And obviously that's something that even the wing backs will do at certain stages now. But then again, I think it depends which way you spin the narratives, because go back 4 years or so, Harry Kane didn't get assists. It was just goals, goals, goals. Now you've got the balance where the assists will come as well. So I have no concerns Barry at all. He looks absolutely in peak condition in pre-season. He looks fit, and he can be a player who we know notoriously the August stat and stuff, but he does need games to get up to speed. And obviously in this case, unlike perhaps certain seasons after tournaments, he's had 4 games of pre-season now. He's played a good sort of 300 minutes or so. He's ready.
Who do you think is going to be your starting midfield? I'm curious about that.
As in the 2 in front of the back 3?
Yes.
I would be surprised if it's not Højbjerg and Bentancur. It would definitely be Højbjerg. To be honest, Højbjerg's a player I've been very critical over in the past, but he was our best player against Roma at the weekend, in my opinion. It would definitely be Højbjerg. I think Bentancur will get a nod over Bissouma, and Bissouma will be integrated slowly. I think Bissouma's good for Højbjerg. Takes him up another level, feeling that little bit of pressure. He really stepped up his game after he got dropped for a game against Wolves in late January, early February, and was really good for the last third of the season, Emil Højbjerg. And I expect him to be the first choice. But by the time we get halfway, it could be that Bissouma and Bentancur is the first choice too. I'd be surprised not Højbjerg and Bentancur.
So you think Bentancur starts in your midfield no matter what respective?
No, not at all. I think he starts game week 1. Beyond that, couldn't say. I mean, take Chelsea away in game week 2. There's every chance he might want to firm that up a little bit more with Bissouma. Bentancur is, I want to say flashy is not the correct word, but he's got more creativity. He's got more in his locker in terms of his passing range than the other 2. He can get caught a little bit ball watching sometimes defensively and stuff. So it's nice to be in a position now where obviously the 2 of them, because of Oliver Skipp's injury, had to play basically every game during the run-in. I suspect had we still been in Europe, we probably wouldn't have finished top 4 because they'd have been out on their legs. But having to normally only play sort of once every 5-6 days was really good for them. So I think we can expect rotation. Oliver Skipp is a super talent as well, Prano. He's got an injury. He picked up a heavy laceration of his foot in training prior to the Rangers game. He's had heavy stitching in his foot. He's just been really unlucky with that, obviously. And he's a really good talent as well. So the 4 of them will compete for midfield places. So to say any of those midfield 2 were going to play every week, I couldn't. Other than Højbjerg will almost certainly play game week 1. I'd be very surprised if it's not Bentancur against Southampton.
The reason I ask this is because, we know that Harry Kane takes a fair amount of creative responsibility in that Spurs team now, with the addition of Perisic, who I think is as much of a goal scorer as he is creative, because he's got a good cross in him. He's a fabulous player. I think Kulusevski's taken a fair amount of that creative load, especially on that right wing. And I feel like if Bentancur is starting in a midfield, you have 3 players capable of playing through the lines, making those passes, which might not lead to, Harry Kane dropping deeper more often than not. Do you think this will lead to... Because I saw the last couple of preseason games for Spurs, and that was my problem last year, because let's face it, Kane's getting a little older. He's lost a little bit of pace. So, when you guys are breaking on the counter, I see that Son and Kulusevski are on their bike. Even the wingbacks, a couple of them who are more goal scoring, are on their bike. And Kane is a little late making his way into the box. Do you think this impacts his FPL potential?
No, because then he might be the one who's getting the pullbacks, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah, again, honestly, it really is one where you can spin the narrative either way and say exactly what I'd said as well. The wing backs will even run beyond and get higher. He's like a trigger as well, Pranel. So if the ball goes into him and if he can get turned, people go. Yeah. Because they know as well, they don't think twice about it because they know that he'll pick the right pass most often as well. So it could well be that we see him arriving late onto things more often. As I said, you've got the kind of assist element that comes on top to him. His first thought will always be Son, if he can. If not, he'll obviously look for others. So I have no concerns about it at all. He's obviously a player who's got a great strike on him as well, so he can score. Unlike most typical 9s, if you will, he can score from distance and stuff as well. I don't have any concerns with it. Harry is a problem for us, I feel, when he doesn't come off the front, where, say, when we lost at home to Brighton in April, they did a brilliant screening job where Bissouma, ironically, sat right in front of Lewis Dunk, and his sole job during the game was to stop the ball going into Harry Kane. And it frustrated me in that game that Kane didn't go moving and go looking for the ball. He was obviously under instruction to stay. And I think he does need to go wandering. And it's better for us when he does as well.
All right, cool. So you think there is no negative impact. In fact, I'm expecting Kane to play a little closer to goal as well. Let's talk about Heung-min Son. Now, the big thought in my head is somebody like Richarlison, who's in the mix now. Now, what used to happen earlier, and your team is very much capable of finishing the game off by the 65th, 70th minute. Let's say you guys are 2-0, 3-0 up. At such times, do you think he's going to save Richarlison? He's going to save Son's legs and sub him off before Kulusevski? What do you think happens in such situations?
I think there's a chance at times, particularly if we need a goal, you'll see all four of them, where Kane can obviously drop at 10 and Richarlison will go and play up front. Or alternatively, Kulusevski can play at 10 as well, and then Richarlison goes and joins the front three. I think that would probably in-game mean that occasionally we'll go to a back four. That's why Ben Davies is very important to him as well. So that's an easy switch then where you can just play Davies at left back. It doesn't have to make too many personnel changes. I would imagine that in the majority of games where the game is won, Son will be taken off. Yes. But we're talking about in an instance where the game is won, therefore he's probably already done the damage. I think once the Champions League starts after game week 6, we're in a position where you can see Richarlison starting games more often. Let's not say he won't in the first 5, where we've finally got a quality, let's say, full forward where we can rotate players. When we play Fulham at home in game week 6, for example, which is the sort of one where you look at it on paper and go, oh, I tell you what, potential captaincy option there. Liverpool are at Everton, City are at Villa, Tottenham are at home to Fulham. You could make a case that Tottenham are best there, although Liverpool tend to perform very well against Everton. But you couldn't, if you're in your plans now thinking, oh, I'm definitely going to captain Son or Kane in game week 6, I'd make sure you've got an alternative, because we play Forest Sunday, West Ham Wednesday, Fulham on the Saturday, and it could be Champions League on the Tuesday. And I think now Richarlison offers that prospect to say, look, it's Fulham at home. Can we rest Son? Can we rest Harry Kane? And that's a position we haven't been in. I don't think it's something we need to worry about in the first 5 or so fixtures. And I think were Kane and Son stay fit all season, you're probably looking at them still starting 35 or so games. But that option is certainly there now for Tottenham. Tottenham need to think bigger as a club, right? And understand that they can give players rest like Liverpool and City will do, for example.
Yeah. The reason I asked that was I saw an interesting tweet from FPL Create Trigger where he said that 14 of Son's 23 Premier League goals last season came in the last 30 minutes. And especially, it does make sense, right? If you're thinking about tired legs against Son and he's the fastest runner behind, when the ball comes to Harry, the trigger's there and he's making that run. But you think if that's the case, the points are already going to be in the bag for him?
Yeah, to be totally honest, it's exactly that. I think if we're drawing 0-0, for example, I don't think it takes him off. The thing is, and as well with him, left or right foot from any range as well. So Antonio absolutely adores Sonny. I'll give a perfect example. West Ham at home last season. Son miscontrolled a ball and Conte went crazy. You won't have seen it on the TV. And he immediately told Bergwijn to go and warm up. Next time the attack went forward, Kane flicks the ball on, Son's through 1-on-1 and scores. Then he took him off. So yes, you will get goals from Sonny late in games, but Conte won't take him off often unless the game's done.
All right.
Same will apply to Kane. I generally think we could have days where Richarlison will come on for Kulusevski with like 5 minutes to go for the sake of it, because the front three all have real variations in terms of the way they play. They're definitely the best front three. Richarlison's got a lot of work to do to force his way into that team, but he's obviously a great option. I wouldn't be concerned about Sonny minutes. Yes, he probably will get taken off with a few minutes to go most games, but I wouldn't be overly concerned about it. Think of the games we had last season where, and again, I think probably the amount of games and space in between the games is quite important in relation to that. So let's say on Saturday, we're 3-0 up against Southampton with 20 minutes to go. Admittedly, Richarlison isn't available, but I don't think he'd take Son off because there's not another game for 8 days. I think he would leave him on. Whereas take the Fulham game, for example, if we're then going to Real Madrid on the Tuesday and we're 3-0 up, I think he takes him off. So I think it's circumstantial depending on game situation, and what's to come afterwards is important.
So nothing really much to worry, especially in the first 4 or 5 weeks, which is what people are looking at the moment.
No, I really don't think so at all. I think not just for Tottenham, but generally for teams, it'll be really, really interesting once we hit sort of game week 6, but I would have no concerns about it in the first 5.
Yeah, because people are, you're literally splitting hairs if you're trying to pick between the two. And if you're going to assume that Kane's going to get maybe 10, 15 more minutes at the end of the game compared to Son. That's just narrative. That is in fact, or do you reckon there is some truth to that?
Oh, Kane will play more minutes than Son. Kane will hardly ever come off. But that option is there now. And we don't actually know that he won't do that. That we're 3-0 up against Fulham, for example, and it's 15 minutes to go, and he goes, no, I'm going to take Harry off. I'm going to put Richarlison up front. We've got nothing to base it on other than previously known that wouldn't be the case. The early signs I get on Richarlison is that Conte would like to use him as a 9 when he used him. And that's very much how he treated Steven Bergwijn last year. But quite often it would be perhaps if we were chasing, he'd go Kane and Bergwijn together, for example. So, honestly, you could spin the narrative. We've not got data to be in a position where we've had someone who could legitimately compete with Kane for a place. Right. To know that, would Conte say, yeah, it's Fulham at home, I might rest Kane? We don't know. Kane, to my knowledge, over the last, since he first broke into the team, I think he's had 2 games. I can certainly think of one away to Leicester over a Christmas period. 2 games where he's not been selected to start when he's been 100% fit.
Just gonna.
I don't particularly expect that to change, but there is the opportunity for it now.
If you had to, put a wager, put a bet right now, who do you think is going to score more goals this season, Son or Kane?
Slight preference for Harry in terms of goals. But if you're lacing that as an FPL question, slight preference for Son.
Got it.
And I'm sorry, that's really not going to help your viewers, mate. But that's honestly how I would feel about it.
No, that's fair enough. And I'm only looking for honest opinion. Now, let's say, there are times where, let's say, we own both. And, I think it's right to get your opinion because I'm looking for, it's about the minor details that actually give an advantage in FPL. And let's say, are there particular game types where you, let's say, own both? Son is a better captain in a certain type of game and Kane is a better captain a certain type of game. In my head, if I see Spurs playing somebody like a Southampton or a Leeds who generally play a high line, in my head, Son's the better captain. Is that a right assumption? Do you think there is value in this theory?
Space is definitely important for Sonny. I think with Sonny, quite often it's more one-on-one matchups in terms of who he's actually going up against. So if he's going up against a Kyle Walker, he knows he can't do him for pace particularly. That said, he obviously had 2 assists at the Etihad and scored in the opening game last season. But admittedly, that was him drifting to the right-hand side of the pitch and coming in off that flank for the goal. So I think it's more about the matchups with Sonny. I was someone who was saying in March, there's a real kind of home and away bias narrative going on here. And as soon as I said it, Son went and scored a hat-trick at Villa. And the reality is that the 2 players are so good that it really is any time, any place. I mean, it's more about the matchup for Son. So take Southampton as an example. Southampton kind of fall into the line where you think, their centre-backs are quite aggressive. They might come out with Kane and leave the space for Sonny behind. But if you get the Southampton that played against, say, Arsenal in April when they won 1-0 that just sits in that hard low block, then it's difficult for both of them. And I guess coming into a new season, we don't know what a lot of teams are going to do particularly. So again, I really think in most cases you can spin a narrative however you want to with them. The 2 of them are great players and can do it at any particular time. I've heard theories of Kane does better against 4-2-3-1s, for example. But every time I've thought something like that, the other one invariably has done better, to be totally honest.
All right, cool. I just wanted to see if there's any validation to that. Now, let's talk about Kulusevski. How do you rate him compared to the other 8 million FPL options?
Super option. Difficult to fit in, though. I think the difference with him and a lot of the other 8s is I'm not sure that he's got the goal scoring power of the others. I think I could look at a Saka and think he'll definitely get double figures for goals. I can't be convinced of that with Kulusevski. There'll be more assists probably, but whether he'll hit the big numbers, I'm not absolutely certain. But he's a great option. I feel like he's one where if people have talked themselves into Salah Haaland, which is absolutely reasonable, then the eyes go very much to Kulusevski as one in some sort of coverage. I think he's priced probably about right. And obviously there's that cluster of players where it's take your pick. And I don't think there's an 8 million option that I'd say is absolutely terrible. We know the risk with the Man City guys, but if Foden, Mahrez play, they're obviously decent options. There isn't any of their 8 millions you couldn't make a a case for. And I think he's certainly in the cluster, and it's probably a little bit dependent on what you're doing with the two premium Tottenham boys. Is probably affecting how serious your interest is or isn't at the moment. For example, I'm not intending to start with Salah. So for me, I want Diaz. And I think there is a little bit like that. I think it's the same with Kane and Son in the sense that I've got Sonny at the moment and not Kane. And it's not even that I particularly have a huge preference for Son over Kane. It's more that I do have a preference for Haaland over De Bruyne.
Correct.
And want to have a premium midfielder sitting in there. And I'd really think like with Kane and Son, that's generally how you could split it. What's your combination might influence which way you go, for example. It's part why you can start with both and then make the decision going into game week 2, which one to get rid of. I wouldn't put anybody off Decky Kulusevski, though. He's another one where, again, you can make the narrative of minutes. And yes, from the front three, he's the most likely to be taken off early. That's factual. That's obviously definitely true. But I wouldn't let it put you off. I think that's the case last year anyway. That's not overly changed. I would be surprised if Richarlison took his place in those first 5 weeks or so.
Cool. So looks like he's going to be safe for the first 4 or 5 weeks. I agree with your opinion. Now, let's talk about the wingbacks, because Conte made some comments at the weekend, and I've seen the community split in terms of how they're interpreting those comments. What do you make of them?
I don't read a lot into them. A lot of what comes out of Antonio Conte's mouth is political. I think what he likes to do amongst the fan base is lower expectations. So he's said comments about it being a club signing in relation to Jed Spence, for example. What he's saying about Perisic, I think, is protecting him in case he looks a bit rusty and off it on Saturday and decides he has to hook him after 45 minutes. I think it's just purely that. I think he's just lowering expectation, knowing that he's a little bit behind the others in terms of fitness and preparation, but don't let it put you off. Don't overly read into things that Antonio Conte says, because Antonio Conte says things that generally are for the benefit of Antonio Conte. I really wouldn't read too much into it, Prano.
So is Ivan Perisic in your FPL team?
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
Absolutely.
He's almost like an attacker, right? I mean, whatever I saw of that Roma game, he's further up than Son and Kulusevski on a lot of occasions. He's very direct, two-footed. I think he's capable of 6, 7, 8 goals in that Spurs team this season.
I think he's capable of more. I think he's potentially playing under Conte, depending on his minutes throughout the season. And he will get rested. Like, if you're expecting Perisic to start 38 games, like, he's simply not. But that probably applies to even people like Cancelo and Trent this season, with particularly the tightness of the Champions League. Remember, the Champions League is over a much shorter period this year, the group stage, than what we're used to because of the World Cup. So yeah, there are times that he's going to get rested. I'm sure there'll be a weekend this season where the majority of wingbacks get left out and we're all left scratching our head with 1-pointers and stuff. I think Perisic is capable of absolutely exploding and making a complete mockery of that price. I generally think if he'd started at the start of pre-season, I think his ownership would be up there with the other premium defenders and stuff. I think it's down to sort of 30%-ish because people have got doubts about him starting and his fitness. I saw enough in 20 minutes against Rangers to put him in, to know that he's just too good.
Yeah.
It's too good to potentially miss out on. There's no guarantees. It's not with any particular player. If I said to you, for example, he's great in the air as well, would that be fair comment?
Yes. Yeah. I think he's just got a lot of outlets. That's it. I'm expecting more goals from Kane also because of him, because of the good delivery that he has as well.
Left or right. There are certain times where it's difficult to tell what his best foot is. And ironically, the same applies to Heung-min Son as well. Perisic up against Kyle Walker-Peters on Saturday. So, and I would be 95% sure that Perisic starts. So on the back post as well, that's part why Kyle Walker-Peters got Mourinho sold him from Tottenham in the first place, was he couldn't handle having a player who would end up in a back 4 or 5 who wasn't very tall in the air. And Walker-Peters is a very good player. Will give Perisic potential problems going the other way, which is why you could have concern about how long he lasts at the weekend. If Tottenham can find him at back post at the weekend, he's going to have joy. There's no doubt about it.
And
he can score all types of goals. He's so unusual for an FPL defender. It's so unusual to have a player like this. And
I also feel like Conte, he doesn't see himself as a long-term manager, as at a club. And Perisic is not really young also. So I think he's going to take as much advantage of him as he can in this year and the next year, because age is also a thing with him. So, I'm not too worried either. Glad that you're as bullish as I am on Ivan
Yeah,
Perisic.
Conte's a short-term manager. No one at Tottenham thinks he's going to be there in 5 years or so. I mean, if you said to me he's still Tottenham manager in 12 months, I'd be happy. There's a chance that we could finish third this year and he'll look at it and go, I can't get near them top two. Sorry, I want to go somewhere where I will win something. I think that's a possibility, although the signs sound progressive in terms of there might be a new contract being spoken about shortly. Yeah, I'm very bullish about Perisic. He can score all types of goals. And of course, Tottenham are better defensively as well. So it's not even just the offensive output as well. When he misses, it can be 6-pointers. Chance creation, even if he's missing, can be sort of 8-point returns or so.
Yeah.
And you can even, again, spin in the narrative. People say, oh, bet he gets taken off early. Yeah, he might play 65 minutes and lock in the clean sheet for you. He won't play 90. He won't play 90 minutes often.
Yeah.
Conte will change the wing backs in the majority of games, even if it's very late in the game, because it is such a hard role to play in Antonio Conte team. But he's went and got Perisic because he knows he can do it. And I think what we saw from the Roma game, when there was a lot of discouraging things to watch about Tottenham, was seeing how advanced those two wing backs are. If you watch the game, it's difficult not to want either of the two wing backs.
Yep. I'm on both right now. Spoiler alert. And I want to
spoiler alert. I'm leaning that way as well, possibly.
Yeah, because I was driving today and, I was thinking about balance in the squad, etc. as well. And in my head, I was thinking about the only reason I don't have Matt Doherty in my team is because I have Ivan Perisic. And I'm like, it doesn't make sense. Doherty at 5 million, if you look at it just as a single position in terms of what he's offering at 5 million, it's ridiculous. What do you think about Doherty, his expected minutes in the first few weeks, etc.?
Yeah, we've released a podcast earlier today looking for 45 minutes just specifically at 5.0 defenders. And I'm not one who regularly dives into the data, but when you do, when you look at it and go, how is Doherty 5 million if he's going to play? That's actually the concern. And I wouldn't be certain that Doherty starts. I'd look at him as well and think there's every chance, for example, Emerson will come in for the Chelsea game in game week 2. And they obviously play a more defensive system. Emerson's much better. Doherty's still absolutely rubbish defensively. He's toilet. But in terms of, again, making the late runs in behind on the back post, he's great. The comment I used is the less he's on the ball, the better. Because he's a very effective player without the ball in terms of his late runs and stuff. This is going back to more like the Doherty, who, remember, came into a season with Wolves priced at 6 million in FPL. And I would have started with him, but for the fact that he moved to Tottenham. Now we've got him at 5 million with far more chance of clean sheets. I'd say, to be honest, more chance of attacking returns playing in the Tottenham team than the Wolves team. The only difference is we've got doubts about minutes. But I with Doherty, you've got the potential. You could say, oh, he's a rotation risk. As I said, there's every chance he won't play at Chelsea. He might get 18 points game week 1.
Yeah. I mean, from what you're saying, and if you have to predict, it looks like he's going to sit out the tougher games, and it's what you want from an FPL asset.
Not necessarily, because I don't think it's the case that it would be that way for all games. And it might be that my opinion's wrong on Emerson. And Emerson could still leave as well before the window closes if Tottenham get a suitable offer. But actually, I think that Conte quite likes Emerson. He finished the season really well. Like, he was great, even at Liverpool, for example, in game week 36 and against Arsenal in the midweek game that followed. So he's bought himself a little bit with Tottenham fans. When Doherty got injured at Villa, people went, oh God, Doherty was just beginning to hit real form. Of course, I just bought him in FPL. And Emerson obviously had to come in. To be fair, he finished the season really well. So you've potentially got 4 players that can play at right wing back, which muddies the water. You've got Doherty, you've got Emerson, you've obviously got Jed Spencer's been bought now, and you've got Lucas Moura has been tried there during pre-season as well. And I think the thinking with Moura is obviously to use him for his athleticism, his direct running and dribbling later in games. I don't think he'd be bringing Lucas on at right wing back when we're holding on to a 1-0 lead, for example. That's more likely when you'll get Emerson obviously brought on for Doherty. But what we saw in the Roma game gives me real confidence to think that Doherty will start in game week 1. But I would say ongoing, you would need to review that constantly in terms of his likely minutes. Because I imagine by the time we get towards the end of the season, I imagine Jed Spence will take his shirt.
Yeah, I just think given the dynamic of this season, given that nobody's playing more than twice a week for the first 5 weeks. And a lot of people are going to be looking to Wildcard after that period. And in that period, Spurs play Southampton at home, Wolves at home, Forest away, Fulham. These are just really, really good fixtures. You think the upside is there to take a better. In fact, in my head, the thinking was that if there is a time to get the Spurs wing backs, it's when they don't have UCL rotation to worry about.
Exactly that. Exactly that. I mean, there are other great options at Doherty's price. You've got the two boys at Villa, you've got Kieran Trippier, you've got the Arsenal boys, Cole Walker, if people just want their kind of 6-pointer on the board and stuff in most games. But you've nailed it. It's exactly that. When's the time to go? Actually, it's when there's no European fixtures. It's now. One of the things that I didn't like about Doherty was the idea that I can't get to Kane if something happens to Haaland, because then I'll have 3 Spurs players. But thinking about it, is every chance I might move to Son to De Bruyne in 2, and then it might be take my pick again for 3 between Son and Kane, for example.
Yeah.
So, yeah, what I'd say about Doherty is he could play 1 and 3, not play 2, and he could be one of the highest scoring defenders in the game at the end of game week 3 with 2 starts. So if he doesn't start at Chelsea and you go with him, don't panic. You haven't got high expectations for expecting returns away to Chelsea anyway. It's the 2 home games and then Forest afterwards, as you say.
And I was looking at it from a rotation perspective as well. Let's say you're uncomfortable playing 2 Spurs defenders versus Chelsea. Everybody's got Nico Williams and Andreas Pereira on their bench. Both of them have a decent fixture in game week 2 as well. So you can, sort of play around with these enablers and figure, because he's not expensive. He's 5 million. That's peanuts compared to what you're potentially getting in terms of explosiveness.
I think the difference is, just to add on that, certainly in Perisic's case, because it will happen at some point this season where Sessegnon starts, or he can even use Doherty at left wing back, as we saw on occasion last season as well. If Perisic is a sub, he'll get on the pitch. It's not going to be a 0-pointer.
Yeah.
It's almost certain. So he will get on the pitch and it will be the 1-pointer if he's not in the 11. That's less clear on the right-hand side. Say he picks Emerson, for example, away to Chelsea, and then we're chasing the game. It might be that he decides to go with Lucas or Jed Spence in that position later on rather than Doherty. Doherty could be more of a 0 where, you want some sort of backup. Perisic, if he's fit, will always get on the pitch, I think. Yeah, exactly that.
Cool. Any interest at all in the Spurs centre-backs from an FPL point of view? Romero was somebody who always caught my eye just because of the ability he has on the ball, and he tends to do well with the bonus as well. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I couldn't now that I've got confidence that Doherty starts, I couldn't make a case to pick either of them ahead of him because of the upside of Doherty. But the 2 of them, if you feel uncomfortable, and I do hear it a lot, I'll just get one of the centre-backs. Romero and Dyer, at the moment, no problems at all. In Romero's case especially, even if Tottenham buy another centre-back, which is possible, whereas I think our business is done at wing-back, for example, then Romero will still be first choice. There's no doubt about it. Eric Dyer has become very influential over the last 12 months or so. He was actually probably just about the only player in the squad that was actually playing well while Nuno Santo was manager as well. So he was consistent all throughout the season.
And he's really ripped up now.
He's what, sorry?
He's looking so fit right now, fully ripped.
Yeah, I mean, people don't remember with Dyer as well that he suffered really bad injuries, obviously, originally under Pochettino, and then he had really bad sickness as well. He missed about 6 weeks with sickness in the Champions League season as well, the year we got to the final. And I think these things are easy to overlook when you're on the outside of a club. And yeah, you're absolutely right. He's got to full fitness. I think both would be very, very sellable assets, as in I could sell them to you if Doherty was 5.5 and if Perisic was 6.
Got it.
And there's a case to say, really, that Doherty arguably should be 6 and Perisic should arguably be 7 and more. And this is more the point.
Yeah. Cool.
Romero will get a lot of bookings. That's the only thing you need to bear in mind. He'll get double figures for bookings if he plays every game.
It's the confirmation I wanted, James, from you, and it's the confirmation I got. So I'm very, very happy to hear you say those things. Now, just moving a little away from Spurs, because James here actually does really well with chip strategy as well. James, how long have you got? Because I know you have to...
No, as long as you want, mate. If we're sitting here for another hour, we're sitting here for another hour. You're gonna let your viewers down now, aren't you?
No. We're sitting here chatting FPL. Talking FPL is never an option. But James here, I just actually want to tell the viewers that he does a pod couple of times in the second half of the season where he sort of predicts the double game mix, etc., that are coming. And I can't tell you how useful that was. It was the reason, and we've quoted you on our pod as well. We essentially listen to your pod, listen to all your homework, take all the notes, and say that, this is what James said, this is what he's predicting. So, what are your early thoughts in terms of how the season might play out? What sort of chip strategy are you thinking about, etc.? Any things that people should keep in mind?
I think the best advice I can give to people, and we've done a full chip strategy pod a month ago, basically, is you don't need to worry about it right now. So yes, you can use your bench boost in game week 1 if you're really desperate to do so and stuff, but wouldn't advise it because of the unlimited transfers. There's a cutoff, and if you know you're going to use the chips at the end of the season, you actually don't even need to think about it until roundabouts the period that the World Cup comes around as even a kind of opening thoughts. So your only thoughts right now should be, what do you want to do with that first wild card? Do you want to go and gamble on players for 2 weeks and go in sort of 3 or 4, for example? Do you want to look at doing it when the Champions League starts up? You want to look at doing it where I call it kind of the pretenders switch, where suddenly sort of Leicester, West Ham, Newcastle, Villa come back into good fixtures around game week 8, which is also around a period where the fixtures get quite nice for the 3 promoted teams? Or do you even want to leave it right at the end and do it in game week 15 and have a free hit basically for game week 16? There's loads of different ways to do it. Most people are obviously going to wildcard early. I'm not set to when I'm going to wildcard. Absolutely not. I think, like most of us, when we wildcard is probably going to be very dependent on how this template does. Because most of us have got template players, whether you're going differential with 4 or 5 players or 1 or 2. If the template does really well, there's a good chance that the idea of wildcarding really early might get postponed a little bit more, I think. If your likes of Jesus, Haaland, Trent, Salah, and all these players are all blanking and doing badly at the start, and other players are flying up in value, you're going to get a lot of wildcards, aren't you? I think.
Yes.
So,
yes. Yeah.
Best advice I can give for first wildcard is keep an open mind. You're not going to have any double game weeks prior to World Cup. Like almost zero possibility of a double game week prior to the World Cup. So if you're someone who wants to use your bench boost and your triple caps in doubles and stuff, you really don't need to overly worry about it at the moment. And this season should be a little bit easier to navigate than it has been in previous, because technically we won't get as many postponements. There's certain things like the FA Cup finals actually at the end of the season. So there's less potential postponements this season, in theory, subject to weather and COVID, obviously, than we would have had last season. We obviously had Chelsea in the Club World Cup last year as well. In theory, there should be less postponements, and they'll be spread across 3 double game weeks. And it's actually impossible to say right now which one with certainty will be the biggest. But it's not going to be till we get into the late 20s.
All right. So just don't worry about it. Chill, enjoy the World Cup, and then listen to Planet FPL Pod.
Yeah, focus on your team now. Don't worry about chip strategy at the moment.
All right. Now you've spoken to fans from 20 clubs. Is there anything that absolutely stood out to you that the general Twitter community isn't aware of in terms of nuggets or information, or you think the community is sleeping on?
It's probably one listening back in feedback to yours, actually, is that Dan, FPL Loco Lord, who come on first, said to us, much to my surprise, that he thought Firmino would start the season. And he was obviously right in the Community Shield. And that's still what he thinks in terms of game week 1. So I've seen Nunes more and more in teams, and there's nothing to say, right, that he can't come on and do the business with half hour, 20 minutes to go or so. But Nunes wouldn't be a consideration for me at the moment. I think there are 4 or 5 better Liverpool assets potentially. That stood out. It's difficult this year, to be honest, because with a number of teams, it's difficult to make the case for players. Take Zaha at Palace, potentially a great asset, and actually often does perform better in the harder fixtures than the easier fixtures. But it's difficult to make a case for him at 7 with his fixtures when you've got the potential, say, Rashford at 6.5, Martinelli at 6, Neto at 5.5, Bailey at 5. So all the best teams have good fixtures at the start, basically. Manchester United are a little bit questionable, but the other 5 all have good opening fixtures. Don't overlook that.
Yeah.
To be honest, you don't need to fire in players from certain teams. There's a few teams like Leeds where I think there's a little bit of unpredictability at the moment, because obviously it's a massive change from having Phillips and Rafinha to the new players they've got in, and they could hit the ground running and look quite decent, actually. They've got a few talented players in there. Like Christensen at right back, he's one I don't think anyone will start with, but he's really worth watching early on. Same with Aronson. There's a little bit of gamble on him at the moment. So they're quite interesting early on. But I don't think you don't need to go into these guys really early on. I think that's the big takeaway. It's unfortunate the way the fixtures worked.
Yeah.
That those behind the West Ham's and the like don't have brilliant kind of... West Ham have a difficult first 8 or so. Because if I think they'd had a great run, we could all kind of really make the case to say, do I want to pay that extra for Jared Bowen?
Yeah.
And most of us are not going to at the moment. I'd still like him as an option, despite the fixtures, actually, because I know he's consistent. But then you have doubts about what impact Gianluca Scamacca can potentially have on him and stuff. So not overly big takeaways. There's a few like Pereira is obvious. I'm not telling your listeners anything they don't already know. Like he's probably going to play as probably left of kind of a left of a 2 in the center of a 4 that will play in front of Paulinho, but it'll drive on to be like the creative 10, a little bit like what Arsenal do, where Odegaard plays further than Xhaka. Pereira will play further forward than Harrison Reed, for example. It's obvious. Nico Williams, obvious. Patterson as the second 4.0, if you will. It's obvious. If you're going 3 at the back, I think you can go both of them, absolutely. No, unfortunately, Pran, we're 20 podcasts and there isn't anything I can say, oh, wow, other than our Newcastle correspondent, FPL Bibbs, tipping up Miguel Almiron, which is partly a long-running joke. But no, yes, I would go Leon Bailey over Miguel Almiron. It's new players, right? It's a new game, new season. You can look at all the premium defensive players like I am at the moment going, ideally, I want 5 of them. But it could be a very different season, couldn't it?
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about Arsenal, actually, because they're such a big talking point. Do you feel threatened at all? Does your club feel threatened by the progress that they made this season?
I think they'll improve. What I've learned to be honest, Tottenham fans have been obsessed about Arsenal fans for a long time because of the rivalry. And obviously there was a good sort of 20-year period where we didn't finish above them. Now it's flipped where we finished above them for 6 years in a row. I know that if we hit a certain amount of points, we'll qualify for the Champions League. So I know 2 points per game is always in my mind. We hit 76 points, we definitely finish top 4. And I keep that in mind and don't worry about the threats of others. No team's ever got 2 points per game and not finished top 4. I think that's a good way to look at it. Arsenal were capable of hitting that number this year. They will do better. I think they'll start really well. It's how they then manage the European stuff with the Thursdays and the Sundays. It becomes a slog. The season may change for them once they get to that point. But I wouldn't be surprised if we go into game week 6 and the top of the league, honestly. I mean, it's possible.
Go on then. Call your top 6.
For the end of the season.
For the end of the season.
I think we have every reason to feel optimistic about finishing 3rd. Most predictions I see, even from the correspondents, the majority of the correspondents predict us finish 3rd. A caveat by saying they all did that after we got to the Champions League final and we absolutely bombed, right? So I'm aware with Antonio Conte as well, it feels like 3 bad results and he'll walk out of the club. So, and if he did, he's the most important thing at Tottenham, 100% more important than Kane, Son, the players. He's the most important thing. If you take him, I think most people were predicting Tottenham to finish 3rd because of Antonio Conte, as much as, yes, there were improvements in the squad, but there were improvements in other clubs as well.
What do you think is your weakness? What do you think is Spurs' weakness this season?
The biggest weakness is we're not as good as Manchester City or Liverpool. That's the biggest weakness right now. I think creativity in certain games is obviously going to be problematic, which I said he may offset in certain games when we're chasing by using Kane at 10 or Kulusevski at 10 and putting all 4 forwards on the pitch and go into a back 4, which we haven't really seen, but I think is something that he might try and do. The creativity is the big weakness in the team. The blessing with us is we can be terrible and win a game because of Kane and Son.
Yep. And now Perisic. I think he's as good up front as well. So cool. Number 4, you think Arsenal takes it or do you think Chelsea?
I think it really depends what Chelsea do in the next
3
to 4 weeks in terms of their window and stuff. They do look like they're starting to make moves. If honestly the squads as they are now, I would say Arsenal would finish above Chelsea. But I think Chelsea are obviously going to make moves. I think there's players like, I wouldn't be surprised if Tielemans ends up at one of the 3 clubs, Tottenham, Arsenal, Chelsea, or even Manchester United. before the window closes, for example, because he's only got a year left on his contract with Leicester. And I think those clubs are potentially waiting to, I think one of them will make a real late move for him and probably get him, actually, unless one of the overseas clubs does similar, one of the giants from Europe. I think United sixth at the moment, Prano, in all honesty. I think there's still too much to do in terms of depth of the team, European competition to cope with Thursday nights and stuff. The Ronaldo shadow and problem is not going away. I think you've appointed a really good coach / manager who will improve. I think United fans need to be patient. I think if United did move Ronaldo on, I think suddenly they'd be in serious contention for top four. If the front three suddenly could hit the vibes, Rashford, Martial and Sancho, and they could really click, you suddenly look at it and go, if they're all at their best, that's a super front three.
Yeah.
But you never really know if you're going to get it or not at the moment. Midfield, if you don't get Frankie de Jong in, I think that's still a glaring problem. I think centre-back is still a problem. I actually think goalkeeper is becoming a problem. He's still on his day a very good shot stopper. But I think he's not comparable to some of the other top goalkeepers anymore, in my opinion. So there's a lot that United need to do. And I would say you could make a case of the top six that United have arguably had the worst window so far. Now that can change. Suddenly you put like Tielemans and De Jong in there, for example, and you go, ooh, wow, put that in with Fernandes or Eriksen. That looks like a solid three or maybe even a diamond all of a sudden. But at the moment, I think a little bit too much to do. I think United will have more inconsistencies as well. Like, I would not be surprised, honestly, if Brighton went there and won on Sunday. Brighton are a tough team to play against.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you say in terms of assessment, because provided Frankie de Jong comes in, I think we have a decent first 11, but there's no depth at all. And I share your sentiments in terms of I think it will be a better squad if Ronaldo is not in a club. Because I also think that if Ronaldo goes, it's obvious that we will find a replacement. We've been linked with the likes of Sesko as well. So, still wait and watch in terms of what's happening. And that's also quite an hindrance because we're 3 weeks away, we're 4 days away from the season starting. And a lot of key cogs in our first 11, I reckon, are still missing. So, yeah, I share your sentiments. Who are you worried about?
I think
for the drop?
Who am I worried about? What do you mean? In terms of go down?
Yes.
Yeah. The only other thing I was going to say just on top is at the end of the day, Tottenham finished above Arsenal because Tottenham's players stayed fit and Arsenal's didn't.
Yep.
And it's also worth saying that the distance between Arsenal and Tottenham got close to Chelsea because Chelsea still had the European distractions and off-field stuff going on where they essentially threw the towel in and was the only reason they really finished at kind of under 80 points, to be totally honest. So Tottenham and Arsenal... Tottenham didn't have European football in the second half of last season. Arsenal didn't have it all season. So it's something actually Tottenham are going to have to manage this season as well. In terms of going down, Bournemouth have obviously massively disappointed with their business so far. I think they will do more, but it looks like they're not going to give major backing to Scott Parker. So with what they've got at the moment, it's very difficult to see them staying up. Fulham, I can't believe they made the same mistakes for 2 years ago in the sense that they brought everybody in late in the window and we're a couple of days away from the season starting and they're scrambling to get players in and in a position where the likes of Tim Ream's probably going to have to play at the weekend. It's not strong enough with what they've got, but I think they, unlike Bournemouth, I'm sure that they will make additions. Fulham, if you remember 2 years ago, everybody had written them off after 3 games. And we got to a point around about sort of late 20s where we went, oh, maybe they could finish above Newcastle. But their problem was scoring goals. Mitrovic shouldn't be compared to the Mitch Fisher 2 years ago. He'll do well. They play to his strengths. Forest, remarkably, despite being the playoff winners, look like with the business that they've done, they're arguably going to be the strongest of the 3. They'll cause a few shocks, I think, where they'll play a few top teams. And similarly to Tottenham, in terms of how advanced the wing backs get forward, it may overrun a few teams and they may surprise. I wouldn't be totally stunned if they got something at Newcastle, actually, but I think... I know Mark Southerns very much thinks that it'll be a difficult start for them and they'll progress and they'll find their feet in the season as it goes on.
This is a new team. Essentially, they've recruited well.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it on the face of it and go, they lost 7 players from the team that won the playoff final. And you think, wow, they're short of numbers, but they've added 12 players and the quality is better. What they've added, yes, they've lost Spence and stuff. You make the case Spence arguably is stronger than Williams, depending on your opinion, but getting in players like Lingard. When Mark came on to correspondent week with us, he was speaking about the problem in midfield. Next day, they went and bought Mangala, basically. So they're firming up in the right areas. They've got Covenant centre-back, they've got a goalkeeper in. left side might be a problem for them. Mark thinks in terms of Toffolo, who's come from Huddersfield, has potential weaknesses on that side. It's something people might want to take note of, and potentially buy Miguel Almiron for game week 1, maybe. Perhaps more of Jared Bowen game week 2 could be potentially interesting in terms of that fixture. Everton are the ones that I think we're all worried about a little bit. It's a huge month for them. They've got to do good business in the transfer window or they're going to be in trouble. And I think even if they don't get a good backup forward to Calvert-Lewin, and if they lose him, they're going to be in big trouble because he's difficult to see who scores goals in that team.
Just before we came on, the news was out on Twitter that he is injured and doesn't look like he's going to be playing game week 1. So already...
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
And fairly reliable news as well. So it's beginning where he left off from last season. He was barely fit for most part of the last season as well. So
ironically, that's probably less of a problem for them in a game like Chelsea.
Yeah,
it's more actually the games where they really, because whatever they get on Saturday, I know they beat Chelsea the last 4 times they played them at home, but realistically, anything they get on Saturday is a good result. It's more important that he's back for like that run of Forest, Brentford, Leeds 3-5, because after that they've got a terrible run again, Liverpool, Arsenal, West Ham, and it goes on. Where if they don't get results in that kind of period 2-5,
I'm worried about them too.
I'd be really worried about them, where they could become adrift. It is in their favour, though, that the 3 promoted clubs all have difficult starts. Like Bournemouth have a swing in 5 in terms of their fixtures become good. Their first 4 are awful. Fulham doesn't get good to around about game week 8, and Nottingham Forest sort of game week 6. So the promoted clubs might all start quite slowly. So if Everton can do well in those first 5, they can give themselves a little bit of a buffer where I think they'll feel comfortable and then they can potentially pull away. But if they get to sort of 6 and they're down there with those 3 promoted clubs, you'd be really, really worried from. Leeds, as I said, I think can go either way. It probably depends on the mood around the club, because obviously the style is completely changing under Jesse Marsch. But I think you might see kind of blank surface starting on 0 points with everyone else, that they might be a little bit more offensive than what we saw at the back end of last season. And Southampton's always a strange one. Capable of losing 6-0, but capable of beating anyone on their day. Like if they turn up at Tottenham and play well at the weekend, they're a team I don't like playing, because they're high energy. They'll get in your face to give you problems, but potentially they'll leave you space at the other end as well. Southampton are a difficult one. They've also got a really kind of rough sort of opening 5 or 6.
Unpredictable as they come
down now. Brentford's the other one to watch. Is typical second season syndrome stuff, isn't it?
Yeah,
where we just know historically that it happens. They've lost Ericsson, but I think they've done good business. Lewis Potter's a good talent. Aaron Hickey at right back shame he's 5 actually. If it's 4.5, I think people would be talking about him a lot more. He's a super talent. It looks like they might be getting Damsgaard in as well. For them will be key keeping the spine fit. So like Tony, Raya, I'm pretty sure will still play in goal, and although they've got Starkosha in, who's potentially a good backup, Raya's distribution is really important to them. So if they keep the spine fit, I think they'll be okay. They could get sucked in. It's really difficult to see the likes of a Brighton or a Palace or a Villa getting sucked into it. I just don't see it, to be totally honest.
Neither do I. I'm not
Wolves
worried about
maybe. Wolves maybe.
Yeah. They showed negative signs towards the end of last season, but in my head, I almost feel like I don't think the Jimenez injury is a bad thing for them, because I like the players that they have up front, and they'll be sort of playing on the floor more, be able to play a much more dynamic game. And actually, I thought they would look pretty decent at the start of last season before Lars decided to change his MO.
Did.
Yeah.
I mean, they lost the 3 games. I was at Molineux game week 2, and I couldn't possibly tell you how we won that game. They shouldn't have lost at Leicester in 1, and you'll know yourself from United in game week 3.
Yeah.
They shouldn't have lost either. Couldn't put the ball in the net for the first hour or so. But then that was as exciting as it was for really in terms of physically watching Wolves all season. They are going to switch to a back 4, which should make them a little bit more attractive to watch. I think Collins at centre back's a really good signing, but there's still question marks about will Gibbs White be there at the end of the window and stuff like that. They don't have depth. Yeah. So like Neto being back is almost like a new signing as well, to be fair. But if they lose him, if Jimenez is out for a while, if Gibbs White leaves, suddenly you look at that offence and go, "Ooh, yeah, that's one of the worst." I
feel like they need to keep Gibbs White because he offers a lot. I saw the couple of preseason games and he's really good. I think he's an underrated player. Might become a player who we're talking about from an FPL point of view in a couple of weeks as well. I wouldn't be too surprised.
Yeah, I wouldn't be at all surprised, honestly, and I wouldn't recommend it. But if you said to me Gibbs White will outscore Neto in the first 5 or 6, I wouldn't be hugely surprised.
Yep. Right. Now our listeners know why I think you should be on Sky Sports or BT. We packed a ton of information in the last hour. I'm so happy that this is the last piece of content we're putting out before the season commences. Might just do a deadline stream on Friday, but it's generally too late to do something like that. James, thank you so much for giving us your time.
Pleasure. Thank you for the invite. And obviously, very proud to be a patron of yours as well. You guys are absolutely superb. And I think those guys who have your content for free, it should give you a little something back, I think, mate.
All right. Cheers.
I do anyway.
Yes. Where can our listeners, viewers find you, etc.?
Everywhere. YouTube, obviously Planet FPL, just search Planet FPL. You'll find us, no doubt. We're on all the audio platforms. You can find my Twitter handle. It's run by me. It can't be run by Surge because it'd be terrible if it was. At Planet FPL Pod is my Twitter handle.
Right. That's it. And we'll see you next week. And we'll probably know our Game Week 1 scores by then. Wish you all the best this season, James, for your podcast, for Spurs, and for your own FPL team as well. Cue music, man child.